Good morning, men. Please turn in your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 2. On your tables, and also this will be for you online as well, is, if you're interested, is a report on the trip that I took to Asia, the 3 weeks I spent in Asia. This was actually prepared by our new Asia director and his team. So we here in Orlando, we didn't have anything to do with this report. And so there's a lot of pictures and things like that. So if you're interested, please feel free to take a copy of that. So what we're trying to accomplish here at this Bible study is we are trying to disciple men who will in turn disciple other men. We want to raise an army of disciple-making disciples. And so in terms of, you heard earlier in the announcements, the idea of inviting other men, but here's who we want to be thinking about. Who are the men 35, 45, 55 years of age who, if they don't get some help, are going to shipwreck their lives? Who are the men who are 35, 45, 55, 65 years, 25 years of age? Who are the men that you know in this community who really could make a difference in our history going forward? Those are the men that we want to have here. And I'd say to you men online, it's exactly the same. How are you going to build or rebuild your community for the future? We're doing a series here called A Step-by-Step Guide for Rebuilding a Country, built around the book of Nehemiah. First, let's do a shout out. We have a brand new group today, 20 men who have just started meeting at their church on Saturdays at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning at the Church of the Nazarene in Richmond Heights, Ohio. And Mark Wheeler is the leader there. And by the way, I guess you guys probably already know, but Wayne Morgret is your field representative there, area director. And so I wonder if you would join me in giving a rousing and a very warm and hearty welcome to this new group. We're so excited to have them, the men from the Church of the Nazarene. Would you join me in giving them a big welcome? 1, 2, 3, hoorah. Welcome, guys. We are so glad to have you with us. I'm very excited about it. Again, the series is a step-by-step guide for rebuilding a country. And we also said that it might be about, you might be trying to figure out how to rebuild your marriage, your business, your career. You might be trying to figure out how to rebuild you. The point is, these principles, although we're focusing principally on the idea of what Nehemiah is doing in rebuilding his country, these principles apply everywhere. So, last time we talked about the message title was the first step, what does God want you to do? And we talked about how God gives men burdens. And so start with the thing that burdens you. When you want to figure out what God wants you to do, what is it that burdens you? And then let God give you his vision for what he wants you to do through prayer, just like Nehemiah did. The whole first chapter is mostly about prayer. And then we saw how sad and afraid both that Nehemiah was, and we talked about being determined to act even in the face of sadness and fear. And I ran across something in Ezekiel 20. I'm going through the message this year in my one-year Bible. And in Ezekiel 23 times it says in different ways, God is being quoted, and he says, I acted out of who I was, not what I felt. Isn't that beautiful? I acted out of who I am or who I was, not how I felt. And so this idea of having fear, having sadness, okay, you have it, get over it, and act out of who you are, your character, who you are, not how you feel about things, because you're always going to have feelings that come and go. The big idea was the first step to every great outcome is to imagine its possibility. And so we talked about vision. Now, today we're going to talk about the three things you're going to need to get started. Again, Nehemiah chapter 2, and we're going to begin at verse 6. So I want to go ahead and give you the big idea for the day. So preparation without prayer is presumption. So if you do everything you're supposed to do, all the planning and so forth, and you don't pray about it, you are presuming upon God. And that's what we actually saw Nehemiah not doing in chapter 1 in the first message. That he did. He began with prayer, and it was through prayer that the vision came. So he did not presume upon God. But that's only the first half of today's big idea. Here's the whole big idea. Preparation without prayer is presumption. Likewise, prayer without preparation is presumption. So you have to have both of these things going on. Otherwise, you're presuming upon God. I've been fascinated over the years how businessmen will get involved in ministry, and they'll be so careful to make sure all their T's are crossed, all their I's are dotted, really organized in their business, and then they get involved in a ministry and they throw their brains out the window. It's just like, God will take care of it. Well, yeah, God will take care of it, but he's going to do that by using the same wits that he gave you to succeed in business to also then succeed in the work of the ministry. In other words, prepare yourself. Don't just pray and think, God's going to make it all work out. It's not this. It's not the Holy Spirit. My disciple, Jim Gillian, he was an engineer, so this is the way he would talk. But he said, anytime somebody would talk about, let's just let the Spirit lead us, he'd say, I believe that the Holy Spirit can work through organization as well as just letting things happen. And so that's what this is about. That's what this is about here today. Okay, so three things you're going to need. First of all, you're going to need the right resources. Let's look at chapter 2, verse 6. So he has now, prayed to God, talked to the king. Verse 6, then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. So, one of the resources that you're going to need, of course, is the time in order to do the work. Verse 7, I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And so you're going to need authority. You're going to need the authority to do. That's one of the resources you're going to need. In this particular case, protection was one of the resources, protection so you can actually do the work. Verse 8, and may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall and for the residence I will occupy. Okay, again, they're just the physical resources that are necessary. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent armies and officers, army officers and cavalry with me. So if you want to rebuild a country, you have to know what to do and how to do it. And in order to be able to do that, you have to have the right resources to be able to pull that off. And so we see that, one of the things that Nehemiah did was he was using his intellect, he was using his wits, he was using his brains to assemble the resources that he would need in order to pull this off. And so I had to put a new air conditioning system in this week. That's an expenditure that brings no joy. I mean, no joy, no joy. So my neighbor saw these couple of pickup trucks, in the driveway and said, "Oh, you get a new air conditioner." I said, "Yeah, but no joy, no joy." And so it's too loud. It's like off the charts loud. So they sent a technician out yesterday. Now, what if that technician had arrived and listened to the noise? And by the way, he agreed that it was too loud. It's a train unit. Oh, should I have said that? Well, I don't know. But anyway, I have 2 train units, and the one is fine, and he acknowledged. He said, "Wow, that's pretty loud." Okay, but now what if the next thing he said, "Well, yeah, it's too loud. We're agreed on that, but I have no idea what to do. I don't know how to fix it. I don't have the expertise." So one of the resources that we need to have if we're going to execute the vision is the expertise. We need to have capabilities. So we may need to get some training. We may have some training, but we also may need to get some more training. So this is not just a business idea. This is a God idea that has been appropriated by business better than it's been appropriated sometimes by those of us who want to do ministry. And then let's just say he said, "Well, I know exactly what to do, but oops, I forgot my tools. I don't have my toolbox with me." Well then, okay, so one of the resources you're going to need the right tools, correct? So anyway, you can see how having the right resources is just so critically important. And so, like at Man in the Mirror. Man in the Mirror, we realized this year that we had become too insular. One of the resources that we have really neglected is outside advisors. So we put together a team of a half a dozen outside advisors this year, bringing fresh ideas into the ministry, into what we're doing. And that's been successful. Maybe it's marriage. Maybe you're trying to rebuild your marriage. Well, if you have ever tried to fix your marriage, you know that you don't have the capabilities to do that. So one of the resources you might consider is a counselor. I had a 1-hour conversation with a man on the phone this week who's lacking meaning, purpose, a sense of direction. And I asked him the same question I asked him 6 months ago when he was also dealing with some issues. I said, "Well, did you get into that small group that I suggested you get into?" He said, "No, I haven't found that yet." And I said, "Well, that needs to be your priority. That's the resource that a man needs. I love talking to guys and so forth. And I don't mind talking to men from Wichita or Sacramento or Kuala Lumpur. I don't mind talking to men and helping them work through their issues. But the bottom line is those calls would not be necessary if those men were in a small group doing life with a few other guys. Did you hear what I said? My phone would never ring if men would follow the advice and put together a resource group of a few guys and just do life together. So, my dream, rebuilding the country. You want to rebuild the country? My dream is that we'd figure out how to help men do life together with a few other men. We'll get to a little bit more of that in a moment. So having the right resources. What are the resources that you need? Nehemiah is outlining the resources that he needs here. What are the resources that you need to rebuild, that you need to assemble? What are the resources you need to assemble to rebuild whatever it is that you're trying to rebuild? Preparation without prayer is presumption, but also prayer without preparation is presumption. So we need to be prepared with the right resources. Second, the right plan. Chapter 2, verse 11. And I'm going to skip over verse 10 because That has to do with opposition and resistance, and we're going to dive into that a little deeper. How do you handle resistance and opposition? We'll dive into that a little deeper in one of the coming messages. Verse 11, so he says, Nehemiah, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on by night. I went out through the valley gate, through the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. So if you develop the wrong strategy or the wrong plan, it's going to be what? A lot of hard work. But if you choose the right strategy or plan, it's going to be what? A lot of hard work. See, this is the problem. Because of the fall, it doesn't make any difference if you choose the wrong strategy or the right strategy. Whichever plan you choose and develop, it's going to be a lot of hard work. And so the problem with that is if you do pick the wrong plan, you won't know it for several years, at which time you will burn out not only yourself, but all of your best players. And it's likely that the ground will be fallow for a few years as people try to recover before you go. You could waste a decade of your entire life just on this one decision by selecting the wrong plan. So it's very important to get the right plan. And so look how Nehemiah is going about getting the right plan. He is doing something that is very important. He is making a first-hand assessment. Anyone who's ever done a business plan knows that the first step of a good business plan is to understand the current situation. And the way we do that, you can do it from your office, or you can get out of your office and go around and talk to your customers, or talk to your children, or go around the city and see where the problems are in the city or the nation. But to understand what's really going on, the current situation, that's the first step. And it has to be done by a hands-on personal assessment, not out of your office in Washington, D.C., okay, but to get out into the field and actually make a first-hand assessment. It's interesting because when I went to Asia, I had a lot of ideas about what was going on in Asia for God, what Asian people were like, even humorously, what all the hacking, that you hear about on the news. So I was having a Skype call with, I had Skype calls with several different groups that I was going to be meeting with and helping over there. But one group in Beijing, there were 3 men on the call, and I asked them, I said, I've been reading all these articles, about security of information and so forth. And so I've got, everything on my iPhone. So I was thinking, should I get another iPhone or another phone, and leave my iPhone at home? And very matter of fact, they said, well, we all have iPhones. Duh, And so the idea is that you can make some very terrible decisions if you don't actually go out into the field and start talking to people and understand what's really going on. And of course, there were all the cultural things, myths, and stereotypes that I had about Asia and Asian people and God in Asia. And all of that's changed. And I don't have a complete understanding, but I have such a much better understanding because I got out of the office into the field. And so to develop the right plan, this is exactly what Nehemiah did. So you want to rebuild? You want to rebuild something? What is it? So who do you need to talk to get more information? To understand what's really going on? That's the important step here into... So I want to just park a little bit on this idea of rebuilding a country, because that's the principal thing that Nehemiah is focused on here. And as I say, these are all transferable principles to all these other things too. But if we wanted to just stick with rebuilding a country, how are we going to do it? What are the things that we're going to find out? Is it going to be that we're going to be able to deregulate our way out of the problems we have? Or is it going to be that we're going to be able to regulate our way out of the problems? Is it that we're going to borrow our way out of the problems? Or is it paying back the borrowing? Is that going to solve the problem? Paying back the deficit. Some people think paying back the deficit will solve all of our problems. Or is it growing the economy? Or is it restoring law and order? Or is it winning the battle against terrorism? Or is it tougher laws? Is it better, stronger defense? Are these really the things that are going to rebuild the country? Are these really the things that are going to rebuild the country? When how do any of those things address the core issues of divorce, fatherlessness, the breakup of the family, pornography, greed, racism, poverty? How do any of those things help rebuild the country? When you get out and walk around and ask the questions and do the assessment, you have to come to the conclusion that if people don't learn how to love their neighbors, love the truth, and love righteousness, that nothing's going to change. And how do people come to love their neighbors? How do people come to seek and love the truth? How do people get to the point where they can actually live out the righteous lives that I believe that most of them would love to be able to live? How do they do that? Well, the Bible is very clear. Nehemiah was rebuilding his country in the way his country needed to be rebuilt. And the way that God has given us today to rebuild our country in the way that we want it to be rebuilt is to make disciples. In other words, however our nation got into this situation, the only solution is to disciple our way out. Let's balance the budget. We'll still have all of these same problems that we have now. Let's defeat ISIS. We will still have virtually all of the same problems that we have now. If we really want to rebuild our nation, let's get at the character of people, the moral fiber of our country. Let's speak to the issues of the human heart. Let's raise up an army of new disciples. And the solution is not just making disciples, but it's making disciples who are disciple-making disciples. In other words, it's this idea of not just helping people make their lives better, but also equipping them so they can turn around and reproduce their lives into the lives of others. You want to rebuild a nation, you want to rebuild our nation, you want to rebuild your marriage, you want to rebuild your family, your business, your career. You become a disciple-making disciple. That's the way. That's the plan. That is God's plan. Making disciples is God's only plan to release the power of His gospel on every problem you face, on every problem our nation faces, on every problem, whatever it is. Making disciples is the only solution that God has given us to release the power of His gospel on these problems. Making disciples is the right plan. It is the right plan. Anything else is presumption. The big idea, preparation without prayer is presumption. Likewise, prayer without preparation is presumption. Preparation for what? The right plan. The right plan is what? It's disciples making disciples. This is all I want to be remembered. I don't really care about being remembered. Sean Connery is 86. I was looking that up this morning. And when he made his last movie, he dropped off the radar. That's what I plan to do. I have no desire to be remembered. But if I did, that's all I would want people to say about me, is that his constant refrain, his constant emphasis, his singular focus is disciples making disciples. Disciples making disciples. Hey, I said it here 1,000 times probably before. I'll say it 1,000 times again. Disciples not making disciples is an oxymoron. It's a nonsense statement. It's just internally inconsistent. It makes no sense. Oh my gosh, I'm getting carried away. Onward and upward. The third thing you're going to need the right resources, the right plan, and you're also going to need the right team. Now, if you have the right leader who has the right vision, who assembles the right resources and develops the right plan, then he will have the ability to inspire the right team. Or it could be a group of people that put this together in the beginning. But anyway, Nehemiah, after he had done his prayer, the burden of his heart evolved into a vision that God put in his mind. He presented it to the king. He got the resources. He's been out. He's assessed. He's made his plan. And now he's ready to assemble his team. Chapter 2, verse 16. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or officials or any of the others who would be doing the actual work. And then I said to them, it's important to pick the right moment. John Doer, D-O-E-R-R. How many of you are familiar with John Doer from Kleiner Perkins? Okay, this is a name that many people argue that he's the greatest venture capitalist who's ever lived. He was behind Netscape. He was behind Intuit. He was behind Sun Microsystems. He was behind Amazon. He was behind Google. They really came into prominence because of Facebook and Google. Funny sidebar, one of our donors has invested in every Kleiner Perkins partnership since their origin. So he's a pretty rich guy, right? Very rich guy. And so I'm talking to him on the phone one time, right when Google was, bam, hitting on all. I mean, they were the hottest thing. Google was the hottest thing, the public offering and all that. And he said, yeah, we own some Google. I said, really? He said, oh, yeah. I said, you own some Google? He said, yeah, through Kleiner Perkins, his partnership. I said, well, how much do you own? He said, I don't know. I said, well, can you find out? He turned around, he yelled to somebody. He said, hey, Elaine, how much of Google do we own? And he came back, he said, Elaine says we have 10% of it. Well, I was so embarrassed and intimidated. I didn't have enough nerve to ask if it was 10% of Google or 10% of the Kleiner Perkins share of Google. Obviously, it was 10% of the Kleiner Perkins share of the investment. But I mean, can you imagine even having 10% of a big share of Google at the beginning? But the guy that made all that happen is John Doer, D-O-E-R-R. And so John Doer he was interviewed, he's in his 60s now. When he's 46 years old, he was interviewed by Fast Company magazine. And they were asking him what he looks for in making a good investment. And he said, just imagine you got some guys and gals meeting at a house of pancakes, to roll over a new idea. And they want you to go to the meeting. You're 28 years old. Should you go? And he said, sure. He said, but before throwing in with the group, I'd advise that 28-year-old to think carefully about the opportunity, the markets, and the technology, and think hardest about the team. He said, what's in short supply today is great teams. Your biggest challenge in a startup or in rebuilding a country will be building a great team. That's what he says. That'll be your biggest challenge. Teams win. He said, he was asked, okay, it's 11 o'clock, midnight, you're on your 10th cup of coffee, you look around the table, trying to decide whether or not you want to throw in with a slot. How do you make your decision? He said this, that's the moment of truth. That's when you ask, are these the people that I'm willing to get into trouble with over the next 5 or 10 years? Because as you build a new business, one thing's for sure, you will get into trouble. So assembling the right team is just so important. And look at, there's so much more he says about this, but he talks about the most articulate team member, the leader being, how important it is for the leader to be articulate. And that's exactly what Nehemiah does right here, because in verse 17, then I said to them, this is his inspirational recruiting speech, okay? You see the trouble we are in. You know, our walls are broken down and all that. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. The king gave him the resources, They replied, let us start rebuilding. And so they began this great work. He was able to put together the right team. Hey, really quick, which of these words do you most identify with? Innovator, adapter, adopter. Not which you think would be more cool to identify with, but what are you really? An innovator, an adapter, you see somebody else's idea and you adapt it, or an adopter, you hear a vision and you can embrace it. Let me tell you, the churches that we work with and the leaders that we work with and we find are the most successful are not the innovators. Because the innovators see No Man Left Behind, our model, and they say, oh, well, I can come up with a better idea. Well, actually, no, you can't. After developing the right plan for 25 years of experience with thousands of churches, actually, you can't develop a better plan. You can develop a different plan that does the same thing, but you can't develop a better plan. It's a model under continuous improvement, so I'm not suggesting that it's perfect. But the people who are actually the most successful are the adopters and the mild adapters. There are two kinds of people adapting models: mild, and at the other end of the continuum, radical. So you have mild adapters and you have radical adapters. The mild adapters actually do pretty well. They take the model and they make little mild adaptations to their situation and so forth. But so the mild adapters and the adopters, the people who hear it, say, okay, we're just going to do it. They're the ones who are successful. And so when you're putting together a team, it's important to know who you are. Because if you're not, if you're an adopter, you may want to be part of somebody else's team. It probably would be better if you're truly not an innovator, it probably would be better for you to be part of somebody else's team. But make sure it's the right team. And then, if you are the innovator, then what you want to do is you don't want to put together the right team will not be, if the team is 6 people, it's not going to be 6 innovators. Okay? If you put 6 innovators together, you have nothing but chaos. You'll never agree on anything. So things to keep in mind. And anyway, that's That's free. That's free. That didn't cost anything extra. So he gives this inspirational speech and recruits his team, and the work begins. So these are the three things you're going to need to get started. You're going to need the right resources, you're going to need the right plan, and you're going to need the right team. Again, the big idea today is this: preparation without prayer is presumption. And then likewise today, prayer without preparation is presumption. These are the three pieces that need to be in place in terms of preparation for the work to begin. Once he had the burden converted into a vision through prayer, and then he'd done these three things to get started today. He'd assembled the resources, developed the plan, and recruited the team. Then the work, it says the work was able to begin. So where is the place that you're trying to rebuild? What is it that you're trying to rebuild? Have you considered what resources would be the right ones to have in order to do that? Or are you still trying to figure out how to rebuild your marriage with your own best thinking? That's a non-starter. Or business problems or ministry problems without counselors. All of these different things, whether it's resources or it's developing the right plan, knowing how to develop the right plan, actually being out in the field and having the right information, or this idea of putting together the right team. John Doer says, teams, teams, teams. I look for teams. If you want to rebuild, you need to either form a team or become part of a team. So how are we going to rebuild the nation? Bottom line, how did I say, if I did want to be remembered, which I don't care whether or not I am, what did I say I'd like to be remembered for? Disciples making disciples. If we're going to rebuild the nation, it's going to be because disciples are making disciples. In order to do that, we're going to need the right resources, the right plan, and then the right team. Let us pray. Our dearest Father, Lord, first of all, we are grateful for the book of Nehemiah, kind of a blueprint or a roadmap, step-by-step guide, really, on how to rebuild a nation. So, Lord, let us take these principles and apply them. Help us to apply them to our lives, whether it's our desire to see our a nation rebuild, or whether it's some other thing that we've talked about here this morning, or that is especially on the hearts and minds of the brothers. We ask this in Jesus' wonderful and his powerful name. Amen.